but I think it's fine. And an EQ to the end. We will see if we need the very highs. Right now I would chop them off, but
what about making your sound better?
okay, so let's make the first bass. I'm going to use Serum for that. And before we jump into it, let's group it. Let's call these basses, well, actually mid basses, because we're going to use a separate sub. And as the second step, before we go forward, I want to set up some sidechain, because you know this pumping effect is very important, because otherwise you lose the groove. So actually this is very simple to do that in Ableton. I just don't really like to use a third-party plugin for that when we have this utility tool. So ARM, the automation, and it's lucky we have the kick drum, so we can, in audio format on an audio track, so we can see the length of the kick drum, and let's use that as a reference for the length of the sidechain. So yeah, something like that. New automation track, and just Control D all to the end. All right, and maybe a multi-band dynamics with a multi-band compression preset. So something like that. And this is cool because, if you don't have enough tops, you just, crank up the top band or low band or stuff like that. Of course, this is not very precise, but, this is what I like to do. So we have Serum, and basically what I want to do is set up an LFO that will just make the pumping sound and bum, 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 something like that. So set the LFO to 1/8, 8 notes, and drop it on the level of oscillator 1 for the first step. And maybe we will need to, automate some wavetable position data too. Anyway, so let's go to the digital. We have the bipole harmonic wavetable. I think it will be easier to set up a MIDI note. So let's go to D#0, because this is the note that we set up for the snare, for the clank snare. This one. So as you can see the peak on D#0, you can see it here. So yeah, right now, this is very weak, obviously, even if I add some volume. And without the sidechain, maybe this sidechain effect is too much, so let's adjust it. Let's add back some more volume. We will see if this will be enough. So I'm going to use a bandpass filter, but only for the reason to boost some frequencies. So bandpass 12 and pull back the mix. So this way, with some drive and some fatness, we will be able to add some peak basically to it. So let's drop LFO 1 on it. So with the drive and the fatness, we already made very nice sounding bass. So, but we are still not there. Let's add the sub oscillator too. Yeah, I think this will sound well. Let's add some distortion. Just a regular tube distortion. Okay, and this is too dry, so we have two ways to go. Is adding unison voices or adding the hyperdimension, or my favorite for making dirty sounds, using a reverb. So for the second step, after the distortion, let's set up a reverb. you know, we don't want to go crazy with the length, especially with the decay. But the wet should be on a really high, or quite high value. But let's cut the lows. And then when we compress, we get some really nice result. Okay, so on every hit I get a different sound, and that is because in oscillator tab you see this random is cranked up to the maximum, but right now if I pull it back to 0, I always start the phase on the exact same position. So with this we won't have a different sound on every hit. As you can hear, it's almost static. So let's go back to the FX, and now let's add the filter. And I don't remember from which version, but Steve Duda added these very nice distorted comp filter things. So let's go to distorted comp to LP, and you know, crank up the comp with some drive and with some resonance, and hopefully this had some very nice, exciting sound, I would say. Okay, let's add an EQ so we can give more bass to it. And a hyper dimension, so we don't want to use the hyper, only the dimension expander. This will add more reverby kind of texture to it. Okay, this is cool, but I think pulling down the sidechain to the minimum is a better idea. So again, duplicate. Yeah, you know, this is normal when you produce. Alright, so let's step this sound further with adding a pedal after, so we are tweaking the drum, the bass, sorry. So with the pedal on the fuzz, we have a very rusty, very crunchy, very low quality sounding thing, and activate the sub so we keep the sub. Right, and the OTT, this is actually very basic. But crank up the time, because with this we get a less compressed tail on the reverb. The opposite is true again. If you pull it back on the left side, we have a highly compressed tail. But I think it's fine. And an EQ to the end. We will see if we need the very highs. Right now I would chop them off, but you know, we will see. Okay, so this is for the first bass, and in the next video we are going forward adding even more basses.